Thank you, Sarah, so much for that incredibly kind and generous introduction. And thank you all for the invitation to be with you this evening. It is just such an honor and pleasure to be part of such an inspiring initiative. And I look forward to learning with you tonight and to sharing what I have to offer to the wonderful work that is happening here. I will be talking about mindfulness and compassion in families, schools, and communities, and really inviting all of us for the rest of this evening and our time together to take a wholehearted approach to learning. I want to start by sharing a story with you about an experience that I had last time I was in India. And it was the spring of last year. Amishi, I, and a number of other wonderful people had been invited to speak with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And at the end of a presentation in which I shared some data from work that I had been doing on mindfulness and mental health, he turned to me and he said, quite pointedly, quite literally, he said, "I think you have a very, very important role. And therefore, with an important role, you also have more responsibility." Now, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama shares a communication like that, I think it's important to pay attention to no matter what. But on this occasion, it was even more so because my then 16-year-old daughter had come on the trip with me. And she was present and, like a good high school student, took copious notes during the entire 5-day meeting, and I knew when we got back to Boulder I would be held accountable. So what he said next and what she wrote down was a clear summary of that responsibility. After explaining the ways in which training the mind can lead to greater inner calm and the impact of one's inner state on others, he said, "From 1 person to 10 people, to 100 people, to 1,000 people, to 100,000 people, that is the way to change humanity's way of life." So returning back to Boulder after that trip, his words stayed with me. And I wondered, how are we doing in upholding this responsibility? Thinking of my daughter's diligent notes, I wondered specifically, how are we living up to that charge for her and future generations? Now I want to pause here and say, I gave the first part of this talk last November at the International Symposium on Contemplative Research that was sponsored by Mind and Life. And Sarah was there, and she called me after the conference and said, "I'm organizing this amazing event in June in Jackson Hole, and will you come and give the same talk?" Basically the same talk. And I thought, I would love to come, and I don't know about giving the same talk. I'm not sure how relevant it's going to be almost 9 months later. Because the examples that I shared in the talk I gave in November were pretty specific to time and place. For example, the experience of my daughter's high school going on lockout because there was a man with a gun in the neighborhood last October. But as I sat down to work on this talk for our evening together tonight, it turns out that what I shared in the fall is more relevant than ever. Because here's the thing, and Sarah alluded to this, we have a problem, and it's not getting better on its own. As I started to work on these slides over the last couple weeks, I paused to reflect on experiences in my family, in my schools, in our community, that I think are reflected, unfortunately, around our nation. On April 17th, in Colorado, more than 500,000 students were kept out of school on a Wednesday, as nearly 1,000 schools were closed due to the credible threat of a school shooting. Less than 3 weeks later, 1 student was killed and 8 were injured by 2 of their classmates in a K-12 school in Denver. These are not advancing. Here we go. Now, these images and these data are sobering in and of themselves. But we have to consider the fact that young people are experiencing a profound lack of safety in the world around them, but they're also experiencing it within. One of the areas that I study is depression and the mental health of women and girls. Depression is widely acknowledged to be among the leading causes of disability in people aged 15 and older. In fact, here are data from a national comorbidity study in 2015 that released data on the prevalence of depression, highlighting the increase in adolescence, and particularly among girls. These data were published last year and show the severity of depressive symptoms increased from 1991, as you can see on the left side of the graph, to 2015 among US adolescents. And you can see the increase recently, driven largely by the girls. And suicidal behavior and ideation tracks with these trends as well. Now, Jean Twenge, the author of this study, asked a question at a meeting I attended last year that, quite honestly, has continued to haunt me since then. She asked, what kind of world have we created if so many young people don't want to be part of it? Again, I say, we have a problem. But the reason that I've traveled here from Boulder, Colorado, is that I know that this is a community that wants to do something. And I want to share with you tonight that science is pointing us to some powerful solutions. I want to share with you 3 practices that I invite you to bring into your life, into your families, into your schools, and into your communities. To learn about these practices, you don't need an advanced degree. You don't need to have graduated from high school. You don't need even to have graduated from kindergarten. All you need to do is to be curious, to show up wholeheartedly. In the remainder of our time together, I want to share with you the science and the practice of these 3, what I consider essentials, that you can start to practice to create a better world right now, right here in this very room, and then carry outside of this room with you. And they are, quite simply, to pay attention, to have compassion, and to get connected. In discussing each of these, I'm going to share with you a particular line of research that speaks to the way in which these practices can contribute to the wellness of families, of schools, and communities. And if you're willing, I'm going to invite you to actually practice along with me and learn along with some of the people who've participated in these studies and perhaps carry forward some of what you learn. So let's jump in with number 1, pay attention. Go back, here we go. Okay, mindfulness, what is it? There's so many definitions, but most of them start with paying attention. Here's an oft-quoted one from Jon Kabat-Zinn. This capacity to pay attention is a simple and powerful tool. In fact, I have studied for the last 20 years an approach to wellness and depression relapse prevention that holds mindfulness at its core. It's called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, or MBCT, developed by my dear friend and colleague Zindel Segal and his collaborators. And my work, as Sarah mentioned, has extended this specifically to women during pregnancy and early parenting. Now, MBCT is an integration of the practice of mindfulness meditation with cognitive behavioral therapy strategies, focused specifically on preventing depression and cultivating wellness. It's delivered in 8 weekly sessions through experiential practice and reflection. And it begins with paying attention with simple daily activities like eating and moving progressively. Oh, these are still not advancing. Moving progressively through the kinds of experiences and thoughts that tend to be potential triggers for people. Now, I have worked with moms for also over the last 2 decades to adapt this approach to be sensitive and specific and responsive to women during pregnancy, including the adaptations that you see listed here, providing more options for brief and informal practice, as well as a focus on compassion, education, and the essential integration of movement practices and yoga. In addition, we also worked closely with moms to ensure that the program was attuned to their needs in the context of contemporary motherhood. The expectations for mothers are so high in our world today. These are media images of what good mothers do on the holidays, in this case, Halloween. This is the reality. So we didn't want mindfulness to get incorporated as just another way that women who are vulnerable to self-criticism could be hard on themselves. So we featured self-compassion and kindness practices and strategies for asking for help. And we created a digital program. Can I ask Deb and folks to, so as I explain this program, we're also going to hand out an object to you. And as you receive it, I'm going to ask you to just hold it in your hands. And we'll come to that in a moment. So we created a digital program called Mindful Mood Balance for Moms that teaches all the same content and skills that you can learn in an in-person class, but makes it available over the internet so women can learn this in their own homes without the barriers of schedules and childcare and lack of trained instructors. So as you receive this little bag, take one object and pass it down. So I thought, how can I give you a taste of how this program works? In what way can we use mindfulness and the practice of paying attention to help to care for our own mental health and well-being and that of our family? Well, I thought I'd invite you to join me in a practice right now. You may be receiving, and actually I'm going to ask if you can pass it on. One of the key essentials of teaching practices of paying attention is that you do the practice along with everyone else. So, I'd love for you to join me in seeing this object that you have just received as though you had never seen it before, which in fact, you have not seen it before. And I want to invite you to hold it in your hand for the moment and to look at it closely with curiosity. As best you can, bringing your full attention to the experience of seeing. Perhaps noticing light and shadow, places of brightness, darkness. Noticing places of shininess or dullness. Allowing your eyes to explore all parts of this object, focusing on the experience of seeing as best you can. And if thoughts pull your attention away from this object and the experience of seeing, simply notice, there's a thought popping into my mind, and invite your attention back to seeing the object. Now allow seeing to fade into the background of your awareness and bring your attention to the sensations of touching the object. Now, there's nothing you need to do in this moment. In fact, you've been touching this object the whole time we've been practicing. But here, invite seeing to fade into the background of your awareness and bring your full attention to the feeling of touching and holding this object. Perhaps moving it between the thumb and the forefingers, feeling places that are smooth, rough, soft, dense. Perhaps rolling the object and feeling the different aspects, noticing fully the sensation of touch. Now I invite you to allow touch to fade to the background of your awareness and begin to unwrap the object, bringing your full attention to the experience now of hearing. Noticing sounds near and far. When your attention wanders, coming back to hearing. And when you're ready, now inviting hearing to fade into the background of your awareness and bringing your full attention to the experience of smelling as you place the object just under the nostrils. Noticing with each inhale the experience of smelling. If it's helpful, closing your eyes, focusing your attention as best you can on simply smelling. Noticing scent as you inhale, whatever is present, intense scent, mild, none at all. Allowing yourself to explore this experience of smelling. And now, if you like, allowing the experience of smelling to fade into the background and slowly place the object into your mouth, bringing your full awareness to the sensations of having the object in your mouth. Without chewing, noticing the sensations of texture. Perhaps moving the object around your mouth. And when you're ready, biting into the object and feeling the sensations of tasting arise. As best you can, fully bringing your awareness to just tasting. Okay, thank you for practicing paying attention with me. This is the exact same practice that we begin the 8 weeks of the Mindful Mood Balance program, although we use a raisin in that case instead of chocolate. I have a personal preference for chocolate, and it's a little easier to pass around a big room. So I wanted to share with you the experience of one of the moms talking about the way in which learning to pay attention to eating a raisin is relevant to being a mom. Let's see if this works.
I think as a mom, sometimes it's just everything is so routine, you get your kid dressed, you get them all, get them ready for the day and whatnot, but just like in a raisin, like if my kid were a raisin, how would I, pay attention to the detail, like if the raisin is significant enough to do the exercise with, and how much more significant is it to take the time to feel with my child and kind of examine those qualities, and how does it feel like when she's embracing me in a hug, and what sensations do I have, and how does that make me feel more whole as a mom, and really embracing those moments, and just being in it. But it can make a significant difference, I think, just in the routine Monday moments of the day, just to really take a moment to be my lovely childish little raisin, but Absolutely.
So this skill of paying attention we've been talking about, it is literally foundational to everything else. It is a major part of the research program of my dear friend and colleague, Amishi, and it is at the heart of mindfulness and the heart of one's own mental health. So over time, as you bring this quality of paying attention, like you did with the chocolate, to what's happening inside your mind, to that babbling brook that lives inside all of our heads, we can start to begin to pay attention with the same kind of awareness to these thoughts that pop up and recur and float like leaves on a stream. How many of you had a thought pop into your mind as we were eating the Hershey's Kiss? Now, the challenge over time is that we can begin to bring the same kinds of attention and awareness to the thoughts that can be triggering and deeply troubling, some of which you see here. And to begin to develop the capacity to step back and see these thoughts as signs of depression or anxiety without getting trapped in them or adding to them. We can truly, through this practice of paying attention, get free of them. Jack Kornfield, a wonderful teacher and friend, says, "When we first pay attention, we discover that our thoughts are sticky, hard to step out of. Fortunately, with training, we can become mindful of the patterns of thought that condition our perception. We can cut through the sticky patterns. That kind of attention is possible for us all." And with that attention, we can begin to make wise choices about what we do and how we spend our time on a daily basis, noticing experiences that are depleting, that drain us, and those that nourish and lift us up, and beginning to make wise choices about the balance and how to bring these into greater balance in our lives. This same skill of attention is also deeply relevant to family life. This is a photo of my dear friend Danny Conroy getting the whole family, quite literally, if you can see in the corner, the dog involved in mindfulness practice, right? So these are ways in which we can bring this skill of paying attention into these sweet and calm moments of life. And then I love this one. When you discover that your toddler has used your baby as a dry erase board and is so proud. These are the moments when paying attention to what you're thinking and feeling can have a lot of power. Because in that moment, you have developed the skill to get quiet, to slow down, to pause, and take a breath, rather than simply reacting. Now, I want to say, don't just take my word for it that this skill of paying attention works. My colleagues and I have been studying this, as I said, for literally 2 decades. And the practice of mindfulness has profound impact on people's mental health and wellness. This is a study that Cheryl Goodman and I conducted at Kaiser Permanente in Colorado and in Georgia with women who were pregnant and had histories of depression. And these are the rates of the extent to which women were protected from depression coming back into their life during pregnancy and early parenting. And what we found was a large and significant benefit for having learned in the 8 sessions of MBCT. In fact, 80% of women, over 80%, were protected from depression, in contrast to 50% of women who received usual care. And we found a significant association between the amount women practiced and the reduction in their depression scores. And it's not just for women and moms in early parenting. Zindel, Siegel, and I did a study of the Mindful Mood Balance program for people in general and found significant benefit in terms of reduction of residual depressive symptom severity. And again, found that the number of classes that people completed of the program, the greater benefit they received. We are continuing to do research on this program. This is a graph from a study that represents enrollment of a study that we are conducting now in collaboration with Mass General Hospital and Baby Center, which reaches 15 million users each month in the US and 51 million globally. And we have screened over 7,000 pregnant women in the last 3 months who are interested in participating in a study on mindfulness to help improve their mental health and wellness. This is profound and has the capacity to truly touch the lives of so many people. But even with the data that we have here today, we can be confident in the importance of the skill of paying attention. Learning to become aware of what is happening in our own minds has powerful effects for our own mental health with challenges like depression and anxiety, substance use, and more. And it frees us to be more present with the pleasure and the joy in life, whether it's eating a Hershey's Kiss, or an apple, or holding a baby, or helping your kids with their homework, or talking to your friend on the phone. Paying attention has the capacity to help you truly be present for those experiences. It is a skill that takes practice and intention, but it is within our reach. Let me talk for a minute about the second essential, I would say, which is to have compassion. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, if you're going to be compassionate, be prepared for action. Because compassion, I would say, is inherently about action. It is the movement towards the suffering of others and the dedication to work to end their suffering. Mathieu Ricard defined compassion as the desire to put an end to suffering of others and the cause of that suffering. Now, my colleagues and I have been really interested in understanding what motivates compassion, and I want to distill it into these two elements for you. One is about how you feel about others, the extent to which the suffering of others awakens within you a sense of empathic care or tenderness, and the other is the extent to which it creates a sense of distress. In addition, it's important to focus on what do you think in response to suffering others? Do you attribute blame to people for their suffering? Do you see your actions as effective and with the capacity to make a difference in people's lives? And how similar or distant do you see people are suffering? So we wanted to know, would the practice of a brief compassion meditation training help to increase people's movement and action towards suffering others? We worked with Roshi Joan Halifax of the Upaya Center in Santa Fe to develop a sequence of compassion practices, which you can see listed here on this slide, that begin with compassion for yourself and then move outward towards the movement towards ending the suffering of first close friends and family members, and then the people with whom we represented in the study, which I'll explain to you in a moment. I went to Santa Fe, and we recorded these practices, and we programmed them into an iPhone. I want to invite you again tonight to have a little taste in this time. It will be a taste metaphorically, not literally, but to practice for just a moment along with the instructions that the participants in this study heard. Let's see. Can someone back there click on the...
Welcome. Thank you for participating in this program exploring the cultivation of compassion. So please sit comfortably in the chair. Take a few moments to get settled in your chair and allow your eyes to close gently. Recall someone to whom you feel especially close and who has experienced some difficulty. This is someone dear to you whom you deeply wish to be free of suffering, whether the suffering is physical internally, repeat these simple phrases of compassion toward the person you have recalled, as you imagine that this is so. And with your breath, silently say to him or her, may you be free from suffering. May you be free from the causes of suffering. May you be safe. May you find peace.
Thank you for joining in that practice, that small taste of this compassion practice that we used in this study. Now, if you were a participant in the study, you would be asked after a few moments to open your eyes and focus on the picture of the person on the screen. And with that picture, you would hear a brief story about the suffering that they were experiencing in their life. Now, Roshi Joan and I were particularly interested in the extent to which this simple daily practice of about 20 minutes for 4 weeks could actually help to increase compassionate action. My colleague, the neuroscientist Tor Wager, however, had spent his entire career studying placebo effects in the brain and wanted to know, was this meditation, mindfulness, compassion business really just anything more than people expecting what they were doing would make a difference? So we worked together to come up with a placebo condition that we included in this study that was an oxytocin nasal spray. Now, oxytocin, the quote, love hormone, we told people that if they sprayed this nasal spray, and we gave them each a little bottle with the prescription label on it to take home, and we said, if you spray this up your nostrils once a day, every day for the next 4 weeks, it will make you more compassionate. And people believed us. In addition, though, we also knew that we would be showing people the images and telling them the stories of suffering others during the same time period. And we wondered, would just simply hearing these stories and seeing these pictures actually make people more compassionate as they became more familiar with these people who were struggling? And so we included this repeated exposure condition in which people didn't actually do anything, but they heard the stories and they saw the pictures of suffering others. So in the end, participants were randomly assigned to one of these 3 conditions. And we asked them at the start and the end of the study to come into the lab and see these photos and hear these stories and to answer questions, as I said in the beginning, about how did they feel towards the suffering others and what did they think about them. And we gave everybody $100 real. And we said, you can keep that money for yourself, or you can give it away to someone who's struggling and someone who's suffering. So what did we learn? Oh, and we also had people come in and we observed potential changes in the way their brain processed information related to these stories and images of suffering others. And those are data that we have just now submitted for under review. So stay tuned. Maybe next summer I'll come share them with you. These are the changes in the subjective ratings. Oops. And what did we find? The red bar is the compassion meditation, folks. The blue are the oxytocin placebo, and the gray show the people who were in the repeated exposure condition. The compassion meditation participants demonstrated significantly more positive emotions and thoughts towards suffering others than the other conditions. In contrast, the oxytocin placebo didn't change at all over time, right? And the repeated exposure participants actually became less positively disposed towards suffering others. Now, these results show us that compassion meditation is not just a placebo effect, right? Because we found changes that didn't accrue for just spraying saline solution that you thought was oxytocin up your nose every day. But when we look at the donation outcome, we see No significant changes in the compassion participants, but in contrast, a significant decrease in donation among participants in the repeated exposure condition, with the oxytocin placebo folks falling right in the middle. Now, these are striking effects when you consider that these benefits accrue, again, for just 20 minutes of practice per day over 4 weeks. That one of the potential effects of compassion meditation in this study may have been in buffering people against the decreased response to suffering that we saw both in their willingness to donate and give money, as well as in the thoughts and the feelings that they reported. Now, this might be consistent with the idea that repeatedly being exposed to suffering others, in the absence of having tools or having a framework to guide your response, leads to a kind of empathic distress fatigue, or essentially a kind of a burnout, in which people are at risk of becoming numb or blunted in their responses to people who are suffering. So I think these data tell us two things. One, they tell us about the benefits that a daily compassion practice, even as brief as 20 minutes, can provide to people, but they secondly tell us about the risk of failing to give people tools to know what to do in response to the suffering of others. Now, I think this is relevant for all of us. If you think about the extent to which we are exposed in daily life to images and stories of people who are struggling or suffering, just think back to the last 3 days of news and social media that you saw. But they're also very relevant to the experiences of educators and families in schools. One of the teachers in one of these classes said these practices are essential for all educators, all students, for all human beings. Making them available, even required, for all educators could have great impact in ways we may not yet even imagine. So one of the projects that we're launching this summer is working hand in hand with educators to co-design an online course in compassion that's attuned to the nature of their lives and the dilemmas they face in the classroom. Because we think that if we strengthen the compassion in schools through engaging teachers as leaders, there is nothing that can stop the amount of support and learning that students can experience in those classrooms. But it's equally important to pay attention to families and the connection between families and schools. So we started working a few years ago in a rural region of Colorado in which the school district is a majority Latinx students and families. And we did a number of qualitative studies that were focused, again, on paying attention, using both words and images. So these are some images I want to share with you of a study that used a method called photo voice to explore what is compassion and what does it look like at school and at home. And women met together, mothers in this case, and explored through discussion, but also through work with a local photographer of taking photographs of what compassion looked like. There were many, many beautiful images, like this one that says, "Compassion unites our hearts and makes us whole." You see the sisters together making a heart in their shadow. And this one that expresses the inherent nature of people from childhood to be compassionate and loving, and highlights the high value of acting with compassion. But this one also has stuck with me. It says to have compassion makes you greater, but to be cautious is essential. And I think this photo conveys the reality of living in an environment that's characterized by structural and systemic forces that create suffering for people based on how they look or where they were born or how much money they have or what language they speak. And as Sarah mentioned, the Renee Crown Wellness Institute that was the vision and founded and supported by my dear friend P.C. Crown in honor of her mother, Renee, really is committed to creating a world where all children, And all young people have the capacity to survive through working closely with educators and with families and focusing on family and school partnership. Ways in which we can extend these skills of paying attention and acting with compassion for the benefit of others. So, in our remaining time together, I want to turn to this third essential, and that is getting connected. Paying attention and acting with compassion are critical, but I would say that as powerful as they are, they're not enough if we're really going to address the challenges we face in our world. We have to get connected. And I don't mean this kind of connection. What I mean, as Helen Keller said, is working together in creative and impactful ways to address the challenges and dilemmas that exist in our communities. This is not work that we can do alone. And I want to share with you one example of a study in our group that is pursuing this work, working with young women in high school on the topic of wellness and one of the major threats to wellness, namely body image and body dissatisfaction. And I want to share a little bit about this study through my description, but I also want to show you 2 short video clips that were created by the team of youth who are working on this study. But a little bit in terms of context, as any of you who work in high schools and middle schools, or have daughters or nieces and sons as well, this study is focused specifically on women. Body dissatisfaction is prevalent among girls during adolescence and is a major risk factor for multiple adverse outcomes. And the good news is that there are peer programs that have been demonstrated to be effective on college campuses. And our question was really, to what extent would these be helpful in a high school setting? This is a broad overview of the work we've been doing. And we started with this evidence-based intervention, which is a 4-session model delivered by peer mentors called the Body Project. But we didn't stop there. We engaged next in this process of co-design, which I'll share with you, and now have launched into a full evaluation project. The first 2 studies we conducted were on this 4-session Body Project intervention, and what we found is that the change that high school women experienced was comparable to the benefits that have been seen on college campuses. Here you see, just from this 4-session intervention, a significant decrease in high school women's body dissatisfaction over those 4 sessions that's maintained throughout a 6-month follow-up, and we have now randomized trial data that show it's better than business as usual in schools. Now, this study formed the foundation for this process of co-design, which is a participatory method that says all of our voices matter. And I want to share with you, so you can hear it in the voice of some of our youth team members.
I am a master of linguistics. I am an educator. I am a professor of psychology. I am a college student.
I'm a researcher.
I'm a grad student of psychology. I am a hiker and nature enthusiast. I am a sister. I'm a mother. I am a queer, trans, non-binary person. I am a partner.
I'm Latina, I'm an immigrant.
A warrior.
Together, we are the Healthy Body, Mind, and Voice Project. We are working across age, expertise, discipline, and settings to identify scalable and sustainable methods to promote a woman's positive experience of her body, the strength of her voice, and her connection in her community. We're focused on supporting women in developing skills during high school and the transition to college, and in coming together to change the world so that healthy body, mind, and voice are supported and celebrated in which students, educators, and researchers work together to create and adapt curriculum materials. It's a participatory approach that is based on the belief that everyone has the expertise and that groups collaborate most successfully when each member is supported to leverage such expertise. Our team included high school and college women, school district members, and researchers, all of whom were engaged to bring their own expertise and voice in order to develop the elements of an effective and scalable program to empower young women's leadership, health, and body positivity.
So you can see from the description of that youth team, the way in which integrating all of these sources of expertise has been so critical to the development of this program. And this is another expression from one of the students involved in this project. And what I think is really important is the sense of agency and the sense of commitment to making a change and to contributing to the lives of others that you can see reflected in the last sentence of her quote on the slide. So with that as the framework and the methods of design and adaptation, we collaboratively created a 12-session class that focuses on the components of mind that include the Body Project interventions of cognitive dissonance that create a way that equip young women with skills to challenge the ideals that are promoted in media and social media about the importance of appearance, and to focus more on who you are, not what you look like, on what you value and what you want to do in the world. And in addition, the process of including a component of a meditation practice that's focused specifically on the body, a somatic meditation that helps young women develop the skills to be fully aware of what they are experiencing inside, rather than have so much attention come to what do I look like and what do other people think I look like from the outside. And finally, this component of passion projects, which the students really iterated and designed themselves. This way of asking a question, how can I bring my learning and have greater impact in my community? And I'll just share as one last bit in this section, a brief 1-minute video that explains some of the small but powerful ways in which they're doing this.
Work on the growth of women and women's rights, and just our community as a whole. It's important to start out safety and security.
I think that it can be seen as kind of selfish to boost yourself up a little bit, and I think there needs to be a space where you can do that.
We had them fill out sticky notes and then put them onto the poster, and they created a really cool mosaic of a bunch of things that will help people feel safe and that do help people feel safe.
It gave me the opportunity to kind of share what I've learned and what I've been able to take from the class with the other people in my life.
When people did come and look at what we were doing, everybody was really into the idea.
A lot of people feel the same way and have the same thoughts, and the more you can talk, the more progress you can make.
So I love what they say at the end. The more you can talk, the more progress you can make. The more we can connect with one another in this work, the more progress we can make. And we are just starting to gather data on this intervention, but this is a study that my friend and SEL and mindfulness expert, Ken Schonert-Reichel, published some years ago at the University of British Columbia, who found that adolescents who volunteered to support others had not only benefits to their mood and wellness, but had benefits to their physical health, that literally getting connected is good for the heart. So, I want to close by bringing us back to that moment in India when my daughter listened to the Dalai Lama speaking about the importance of care for the 1 in the 100,000. Tonight we've explored together 3 practices: paying attention, having compassion, and getting connected. And I would venture to say that these 3 are each essential in caring for the 1, yourself, as well as the person who's sitting right next to you, who you see when you wake up in the morning or when you get to work, as well as reaching out to the 100,000. Our science to date has demonstrated that these essentials can be developed and strengthened in short periods of time. The studies I've shared with you have been like 4 classes, 8 classes, 12 classes. And these skills that are learned in the context of these daily classes and daily practices and brief classes suggest that the skills have benefit for ourselves and for others, and that they endure over time. Now, there is much left to learn. So as a researcher, I want to say to you that I and my colleagues are dedicated to continuing to study these practices, to explore and to refine them, and to find ways to increase access so everyone who is interested in this kind of learning around the country and around the globe can access the benefits of these in their personal, family, and community life. But as a mother, and as a teacher, and as a sister, and a neighbor, and a friend, I want you to also know that I am dedicated to practicing these essentials each and every day, at home, at school, and in my community. And I, like all of us in this process, will make mistakes. I will certainly forget to pay attention to the everyday moments of this amazing life that I and we have been gifted. I will not see the suffering, or have moments when, in fact, I turn away from suffering, even though it's right in front of me. I'll get busy and think, this would be easier to do myself than to get connected with someone else. Or I'll feel the weight of an important deadline or a long list of things to do and forget to appreciate the real power of any work, the people who are connected in the doing. And in those moments, I will remind myself that there's nothing lost and that it's always possible to begin again with these practices. The simplicity of paying attention, having compassion, and getting connected. And I invite you to join me. I want to end with a few lines from one of my favorite poems called When Giving Is All We Have by Alberto Rios. And the first line is, "One river gives its journey to the next." And it goes on to say, "You gave me what you did not have, and I gave you what I had to give. Together, we made something greater for the difference." What we do in our hearts and minds and in our relationships with one another impacts us today and long into the future. And through these simple practices of paying attention, having compassion, and getting connected, we can make a real difference in our families, in our schools, and our communities, as the studies I've shared with you tonight have shown. I would say, to go back to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's message, that we each hold an important opportunity and responsibility in this work. Because this work is so urgent, we need every one of us. Every person who's here tonight, every child, every parent, every educator, every community member, every leader. And I invite all of us to join together. Thank you for your wholehearted attention. I know this has been a long evening of talking and listening, for your compassion, your willingness to spend your time learning in a way that has benefit for others, and your connection, which I encourage you to expand and to reach out as we go through the rest of this evening and into your next days. Thank you all so much.